Welcome to this new episode of season 6 of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Today, I have the great pleasure of having with me, straight from New York, Priten Shah. And Priten is CEO of Pedagogy Cloud. The URL is scrolling here for people who are viewing, which provides innovative technology solutions to help educators navigate global challenges in a rapidly evolving world. He's the author of Wiley's Josie Bass publication, AI and the Future of Education, Teaching in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. Priten is also the founder of the civic-focused nonprofit United for Social Change. He has a BA in philosophy and an master's in education policy from Harvard University. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, Priten. It's super cool to have you here talking about this subject that is having so many people question themselves about how they need to change their work, what tools to adopt and what tools to avoid, and even just is this something that's untouchable and that we should just stay away from in academia? So super happy to have you here today and to explore that with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It'll be an important conversation going into the new school year.
Yeah. So Priten, maybe one thing I like to do actually at the beginning of every interview is, so BA in philosophy, master's in education policy. Can you talk a little bit about what motivations or what curiosity brought you to take your studies that way, and go all the way to graduate school to go deep into into the root of what's behind education policy, which is also something that's super interesting to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually started working in the education space in high school. I had started a ed tech nonprofit.
Okay.
And that really shaped my, the rest of my life. And so I've always been interested in thinking about education and technology, and how those two intersect and how we can, solve some of the largest problems in education using technology. During my undergraduate years, I got to tackle this from thinking about it from a philosophical lens of what is the purpose of education? What are our aims in education? How do we make education more just and equitable? And so, that was those were some formative years in terms of thinking about the big picture of why we have public schooling systems and what the point of a liberal arts education is, and those kinds of questions. I then got to spend some time working on ed tech projects. And so we were doing everything from building mastery learning courses that were using tech. During the pandemic, we did a lot of transitions for educational institutions, both like schools and universities, but also online events. So debate tournaments, mock trial, model UN, those kinds of things. And that made me kind of also just take a step back and think, okay, there's larger questions we can ask. There's things I can do on a daily basis. But all of these things kind of intersect in the policy world when we think about what kinds of policies do our governmental institutions need to make? What kind of policies do local, school districts and universities need to make in order to kind of implement both these things, right? Deal with the real evolving challenges that are happening every day, but also, make sure we're still in service of those larger aims that we have as educators.
Mm-hmm. And now, coming to today, so we're talking specifically about generative AI. This is something that is fairly, it's fairly new, that it's become so widespread throughout society in all domains, but also it grew really fast. It feels like, for example, me as a podcaster, I'm now constantly receiving emails from people who have this new AI solution to solve all your problems. But when in your journey did you cross paths with this question of generative AI, and how did you end up, getting so interested about it, or so maybe involved in thinking about it, that it led you to actually decide to go on that journey, which is writing a book about it and about its impact on education?
Yeah, the first time I ever, really sat down and did any work with natural language processing, which is what creates the bedrock for generative AI later, was in college. And it was for a pet project. And so I was working on, I have a minor in Sanskrit. And so at that time I was working on a tool to kind of help myself learn Sanskrit, practice my
Okay.
paradigms. And so I looked at the natural language processing because there was libraries that were created to work with Sanskrit.
Wow.
And that was the first time I was like, oh, this is actually really cool because, to me, the intersection of two very different worlds for me. It was like my interest in my culture and my background, a world that's thousands of years away, with the cutting edge technology. So that was a fun project. And I played around a little bit with it during college. And then since then, we kind of just always were like, okay, the day AI becomes strong enough, we'll do this for students, or we'll implement this in the platform. And there was, early conversations, but the tech wasn't really accessible enough or scalable enough for us to really implement anything until that, November 2022 release, where ChatGPT really became
Yeah.
accessible, popular, and feasible for us to scale small solutions for individual institutions, right? So of course this stuff was happening in research labs for years, but in order to do something for a group of 100 students, the tech really had to be more accessible and cheap enough to do it
Of course.
at that level. And so that's when we first started saying, oh wow, this really opens up the doors to things we didn't think were possible for another 5 years, that we could now do for our clients and our students much more rapidly. And as I'm sitting here really excited and saying, oh, wow, this is, look, how can, let me build this tool, let me build that tool, let me see if I can talk to my clients about if they're interested in this and that. Everybody I was talking to was upset. They were scared.
Yeah.
They were worried about plagiarism. They were worried about student
Exactly.
misuse of the technology. And that's when I was like, okay, my excitement is not matching up with educators on the ground. And so this is a moment for me to kind of take a step back and think about how do we I this next a moment in education. How do we get folks to understand that there are real concerns? And I think the book, I think I take a pretty middle stance of there are real things for us to think about. There's actual ethical questions that we need to think about. We don't need to dramatically change everything and anything about education as AI continues to grow. But there are some cool opportunities for us, right? There are ways that we can help our students. There's ways that we can help ourselves. And there are real implications for what it's going to do for society. Society will not look the same, regardless of, even if our aims in education are the same. And so that's when I was like, okay, I need to take all of this, meet educators where they are, and give them a starting place to navigate this time and get the background information on, what is AI? We during the pandemic worked with educators all around the world, and there were a lot of folks who struggled with the technology that we were asking them to use during the pandemic. And so we did trainings on how to mute and unmute and kick a student out of the class, help them rename themselves, and really things that for tech first students was intuitive, but for a lot of educators it was the first time they were using technologies like Zoom and other online platforms to educate. And so then the disconnect between that and the level of tech literacy you need to navigate AI is even greater. And so we were hoping to bridge some of that gap using the book,
Okay.
and kind of give people a starting place. Yeah.
Very cool. So let's go back to when that watershed moment of ChatGPT comes out into the public. Of course, there were waves of people who got access to it, but that was the moment you said that everything changed in terms of what you could do and what you could offer based on that tool. Now there's a multiple tools out there that are kind of vying for part of the ecosystem, but clearly you were thinking about the needs of students and educators too before that moment. What were the domains, or maybe even the specific needs that were crying, that were really important, that you wanted to solve and help people with, that AI came and really allowed you to create and to offer something more powerful?
Yeah, the thing that I'm most excited about, and this is a work in progress for us still, is the intersection of mastery learning and standards-based learning, and AI. And so, we've been working with a client, for example, out of the Harvard Department of Philosophy, who is building a reasoning tool to help students kind of learn how to reason in a systematic way. So they use argument mapping to do that. And one thing we're doing for them is, creating practice exercises for students that are tailored to their personal interests, but also volume of exercises is necessary for something like mastery learning. So just for somebody who's listening, and that term might be there might be different terms across the world for it. And so mastery learning is basically where the student does a lot of formative exercises, and unlimited formative exercises, in fact, until they feel ready to take a summative assessment. And then they can also take the summative assessment as many times as they want, but they just have to demonstrate like 90% or above mastery before they can move on. And so, the goal there is to just make sure that they learn the material. There's no restrictions on the number of exercises, practice, and assessments that they take. But that's a lot of exercises. And so for a human educator to implement that would require, lots and lots of work to make sure that there's enough practice exercises, enough assessments that are built. And then to also tailor them to individual students' interests. I mean, this becomes an impossible task for a human. And that's the one we're trying to see, we're trying to build out for this client is, how do we build a lot more exercises quickly, especially ones that are tailored towards students' particular interests. And so, especially for a course as broad as reasoning, they have students at all different levels. So they have everything from high school students to actually even lawyers take their course.
Okay.
And so a huge range of interest when you have, especially when you just think about like the higher ed level, right? Like they have students in philosophy, in history and English and writing classes. All of those folks are taking this course, and the basic fundamentals of reasoning are the same, but what kinds of exercises are interesting, what kind of examples are interesting are very different. And so that's the space that we're trying to see. Generative AI is a perfect solution to something like that, to provide them that custom, exercise set.
Sure. And so it feels to me like, well, of course, this is helping students and educators. But given that the people, the audience of Beyond the Thesis are mostly graduate students, are there some problems or some pain points that you've tackled that apply more to people who are, leading a research project and having to manage references, et cetera, et cetera? Is there any aspect of it that pertains to that?
Yeah, so we work with a pretty wide audience, and so when we do a lot of our professional development work, we do get 30 to 40% end up being higher ed faculty, and so they're working directly with grad students and undergrad students. And that space the terrain of exactly what's ethical and what's not, I think is a more fundamental question that I think folks need to answer before we can figure out exactly what tools folks are going to want to use, because I think there's still guidance is coming out from all sorts of places. None of it's really consistent. And so we're seeing folks say, okay, as long as you're using it for the brainstorming stage, and so maybe you're, like writing your thesis by you're, working through your hypotheses with an AI tool, but then everything else is yours, or you're, doing the actual data collection, you're getting your research done, and then you're using it to write. All that guidance is not is equal across the board yet. And so I think folks are mostly afraid to touch any of these tools. I think what we're seeing is, especially students, early in their careers who don't really want to, get into any sort of trouble, get accused of any sort of malpractice, are finding that they're being very cautious about how exactly they implement these tools. What I'm hoping we start to see this fall is, I think, some more direct guidance from, institutions will be helpful if they can more clearly delineate that, that it's okay to use these tools in ways that are in production of your thinking, right? In support of it, to help you refine it. But your original thinking still needs to be there. You need to take responsibility for what you write and what you put out there. And I think that transition will start to happen. And so then I'm hoping, a very easy fundamental way to use it is just to use it as an outlining tool, as a thinking buddy, right? So I like to use it for any sort of writing I do. And so the way I have it create outlines for me is to phrase them as questions. And so I do better, blank papers too much. I get really, I get caught up in the blank paper. And so even since high school days, my strategy was always to start to throw a quick outline up, whether it be, 5 bullet points. So that was enough to usually just break up.
To get you started. Yeah.
So exactly. And AI can do that, but not in fact just do create your outline for you, but force you to create your outline, right? So
Mhm,
rather than
mhm,
have it do the thinking or tell you what the points are, it can ask questions in an outline format, and the answer to which becomes your outline. And so
mhm,
that's a
mhm,
strategy that we've been recommending, because that means all of the actual points that you're making are yours. They're coming organically from your answer to those questions,
mhm,
and then the AI tools are serving as your guide more than doing any work for you.
mhm,
So
mhm.
that's a really easy example of where it starts to be clear when it can be productive, help you find your arguments, your voice, versus replace your voice in your arguments.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel that's very, very balanced what you just said, like fair and balanced. Because what people, organizations who are now pushing, AI based services in all domains, and of course the one that I'm very conscious about right now is this podcasting space. They try to tell you that it can do everything, and eventually you think, okay, but if it does everything, is it even my podcast, or is it even my content? And of course that is even more important and critical in academia, where authenticity and novelty, etc., and uh, plagiarism are questions that are key and central to the value of what you do. So it does make sense to use them in planning, in preparing what you then will create from, with your language, with your style, and that is completely novel. But I do agree that I myself have been using some of these tools, and they are really good for that. For if you have this blank page, this
Yeah.
fear or freeze,
Right.
blank page freeze, this can really help you deal with that and get you started then doing your own work. The thing that is dangerous right now with the way it is I think, first, artificial intelligence is a bit of a misnomer. There's no intelligence there. And you
Right.
kind of mentioned it when you mentioned the exact
Yeah.
technical term. um, but it does, one of the things that you hear a lot, and that's really critical, and that you need to be cognizant of, is the hallucinations. There's a case of this lawyer who used ChatGPT to prepare an opinion, or anyway, to prepare his, what's the name in English now, his statement. And then he had articles in there, like, he had jurisprudence in there that was just
Yeah.
non-existent. And then he was the judge, of course, noticed it, and I think, I don't know if he was disbarred, but that's really, really serious. And it's something that in academia, in research, and also as a student, in undergrad, that can really negatively affect your prospects in the academic ecosystem. So yeah, you need to be. The way I do it, myself, is I always consider it's wrong. So I need to go through anything that comes out of it, and then, of course, keep what's good, and cut what's bad. So yeah, it does make sense. Now, you did mention that part about, how for this client, you actually are developing a tool that allows them to, for each student, kind of tailor a learning journey that will bring them to a result through a specific type of questioning. And so this mastery model, is this have you worked on something like this more on the higher ed space, or is it something that you'd be interested to do, or we're not there yet?
Yeah, actually, this client works predominantly with higher ed
Okay.
students. Yeah, so the bulk of their audience are undergraduate students, and they do work with pre-law students in the past.
Okay. Okay.
So
Okay.
they've released a brand new course just for pre-law students and 1L graduate students.
Hmm.
And yeah, because the kinds of reasoning that they teach is a very systematic one. So it's not it really does take students through a very formulaic way of thinking about arguments, about dissecting texts. And so the same method can be used for any text. And so whether it be a New York Times article or it be a piece of scholarship, the same method is used. And so that's that, a lot of their work is done at that level. And that's why we're trying to tailor exercises, because, when if it's younger, we can kind of get away with a bunch of exercises about sports and current events and just kind of keep them more general and help them practice those skills. When we want, like more complicated exercises for higher level students, that's when we're hoping to use AI to kind of tailor it to various audiences. But the course without the AI component has been live. We've been working with them for over 6-7 years now.
Okay.
It's all human created exercises though, so the team worked really hard to get lots and lots of exercises created, and that's the pain point we're trying to solve. But yeah, they're very excited about the growth they're seeing. They're excited about the reviews they're getting from faculty members, because students are finding that they're able to better understand and dissect the structure of arguments. And that's a skill that as philosophers it's the first skill that you're taught, and until then you can't really make sense of any other philosophy. But that basic skill set is useful in any discipline, right? Like the foundation of academia is argumentation. And so, getting that skill strengthened both to articulate your own arguments and figure out the structure of it, but also, dissect someone else's arguments is a skill set that we find very universal. And so,
of course,
that is definitely something we're excited about. And then a lot of the other, that's exact same type of thinking that I just talked about in terms of dissecting your arguments, dissecting someone else's arguments. Those are other uses that we can, see like higher ed students and faculty members using for their own writing and production, right? So if you're a grad student working on a paper and there's a particular paragraph that you're not sure is clear enough to, once you work on a paper for 3 to 4 months, like it starts to become a little, you start to lose track of what's clear, what's not, what's obvious to you versus what's obvious to a new reader. And using AI for those kinds of things, I find very productive as well. And so, when you're sitting there and you're writing something and you've thought way too much about it, drop it into an AI tool and say, okay, where am I missing something? What's not clear here? And see what questions it comes up with. And that's where, we really hope that people can start seeing this as like a tool, the way they would use a spell checker or a word counter, a tool to build their bibliography, a research tool, where it doesn't have to do any writing. It doesn't have to take over any of the writing process from you. But you can have lots of conversations about it the way you would with you sit down with your faculty advisor, and you might have a similar conversation. It can do some of the preliminary conversations can happen with AI tools now. And that's what we're hoping that folks can kind of really start to embrace and start to see, how can I augment my own thinking? Where is this gonna make it better for me to do my work rather than replace my work? And that's the line that we're hoping becomes more clear.
And in that context, what are good practices, let's say, to avoid using data that's hallucinations?
Yeah, and I think you already hinted at this, right? So I think of the going in with a high level of skepticism about any sort of factual things, any sort of factual things, and making sure that all of that is backed up with a credible source is in the same way we would approach any other research project, right? So and that is there are some citation guidelines we're seeing that say, oh, you can cite an AI source as an authority. We normally advocate against that for what you do in a classroom because it's not an authority. It's not a primary source. It's not even a secondary source, right? So use it to guide your thinking. Use it to maybe as a writing tool to help you with figuring out, oh, what's not clear here? How might I redo the sentence? Those kinds of questions are great to use it for. But relying on it to do basic research is a risky prospect right now. And the tools are getting better at it. So this is a problem that exists now. The rate of hallucination is likely to get lower and lower. It's already substantially lower today than it was 2 years ago, or a little bit less than 2 years ago. But fundamentally, when you're training to become a producer of academic knowledge, you still want to know where that information is coming from, and that's something that the AI tools are still not that robust at doing. And there are tools that are developing solely for this purpose. And so Perplexity, for example, will cite sources for everything it produces. And so you might use that for some background research.
Can you repeat? There was, I think you touched your mic or something. The name of this?
Oh, I'm sorry. Perplexity.
Perplexity. Okay.
Exactly. Perplexity is a great internet research tool. A tool that I've been playing around with that looks at open source academic works and produces basically mini lit reviews is Illicit. We're still, playing around with and seeing how robust it is, but the tools like that will continue to develop. Again, this is early stages of those kinds of tools. But for example, Illicit's like claim to fame right now is that they go through all open source journals.
Okay.
You can ask a research question, and then it provides like summaries from how these different papers like might answer different aspects of that question. You can synthesize data from different studies. So those kinds of tools will continue to grow, and those will be interesting. But fundamentally, you're not relying on the AI to tell you XYZ piece of information. You're now using it to do the synthesis and to do the research. And those again are places where you're less likely to run into hallucinations because you have the primary articles to then cross-verify with. And that's the key. Even that lawyer that you mentioned, right? Like, even if he used it to draft his brief, if he had gone through and checked all the cases,
there you go.
He might have found 2 or 3 that were wrong, fixed it, and then been able to use the work that it did. But the key here is the skepticism, like making sure that everything is producing. Like, can you justify that? Can you back that up if you were asked to, on the spot, verify that? And I think that's the key skill set that we're teaching, actually. In fact, that's basic AI literacy that we'll need to do at all levels.
So it's like a very powerful but non-specialist virtual assistant that you now have access to through this non-human interfaces and services. But then you need to go through that work and be skeptical and cut it down to whatever is solid, and then use that to create your own thinking, your own writing, etc. It makes total sense to me. Now, a question: are those tools? Because I'm thinking of labs or people who may have, I don't know, 4 years of data and would like, are maybe challenged in terms of going back to something that's 5-year-old through their data. Of course, we're talking about digital data that can be explorable in a way. Can AI help you mine data from things you've accrued over the years, and that it's humanly very complicated to go back and find the nuggets and maybe find old ideas in there?
Yeah. And so this is going to depend on, like what kind of data it is. Is it, is this statistical data? Is this numerical quantitative data? Or is this, qualitative data? Is this research that you've done? But all of that is possible. The right tool might just differ depending on what the data set looks like. It also will depend a little bit on how much data there is, because these tools will have different context likes. And so some of these tools can deal with a lot more data than others because they can deal with a lot more like text, words, numbers. But in general, we do find that these tools, especially, like for example, ChatGPT has a code interpreter built in. And so it's able to like process spreadsheets really quickly, synthesize data from across things, put data in the same format, and then combine it. Those kinds of functions, it's good at doing. So if you have like a bunch of different, data was collected over the years and it was, slightly different formatting for each year, and you want to kind of put it all together, it can help you do things like that without having a human go through and, line everything up properly, make sure the data is in the same format. So functions like that, it can definitely do. There's other tools. So if you have more qualitative data, if you're looking at survey results, if you're looking at firsthand reports of something, journal entries, those kinds of things. Some of the text-based tools are probably a little bit better for that. And so, the two tools that I'm excited about for those kinds of things are definitely Google's Notebook LM.
Okay.
That one's one that I've been playing around a lot with, and that's also a great one for just any for grad students in particular. I haven't found very many uses at the K-12 level for that, in fact, yet, for like in-class usage, but for Notebook LM basically lets you upload a variety of sources. And so you can upload PDFs, you can upload, you can put links to online articles, you can put your own notes in there, and then you can ask questions about your whole knowledge base. And so if you upload, 10 articles that you've recently read for a research paper you're doing, and then you said, okay, like find me the 5 that agree with each other, it can do something like that. And then it will actually cite exactly where in the article it's pulling from. The use that I've been doing at the, I'm teaching a intro class this fall, and I put my syllabus in there and I put all my assignments in there. So students can go in and say, how does my grade calculated in this class? Or what exactly is what is my next assignment due? And they can actually go through and it'll point the student and say, okay, here's page 3 of the syllabus in this section. Here's how your grades calculated, and it does those kinds of things for the students. So that can be similarly used for research projects. If you can upload data sets in there and then ask it questions about the data set. So definitely doable with these kinds of tools. Claude's the other one that does a really good job with text-based input, we found. Where that's another one where if you upload lots and lots of data, it does a good job of not hallucinating things in the data set.
Okay.
So, and that's the concern, right? Like the concern is you upload 5 years of data and then it makes some of it up. There's no way I mean, the whole point is you don't have the time to verify it, each and everything. So you do want a tool that's going to stick pretty, has safeguards in place to avoid that kind of hallucination.
Very cool, because I imagine that's something that could be interesting, and it's not so risky in terms. Of course, like you said, there's hallucination it's a rate that's getting smaller and smaller, but it's still there. So you still need to be skeptical. But if we're talking about just data mining a set of data that's yours, there's less risk there already.
Right.
And it seems you already shared a couple of tools that are available to the public, if I understand well, and they are fairly easy to. I didn't know about Google Notebook. It's something actually. What I'll ask from you is, after the interview, if you can send me a kind of a short, like bulleted summary of the tools that you've talked about. I'll put them in the show notes because I think people are very eager to have recommended tools that they know they can use, because again the offer is so so wide out there that often you feel lost, and you also feel there's too much of this, I don't really want to touch it. So it's really cool. Thanks for recommending and for actually giving examples, because that's precious information. Now Priten, you have Pedagogy Cloud. You talked about it a little bit. You talked about an example of a project that you're working on, but you have the book AI and the Future of Education. I wonder whether there's some, because we've covered a few things based on your experience, based on the questions that I had, but is there specific take homes from the book that we kind of didn't cover and that you think could be of interest to the audience of Beyond the Thesis? Or maybe if there's no specific take homes, do you want to talk a little bit more about the book, the before and after? There's always a before writing a book and an after writing a book. How that book kind of allowed you to reflect about this, and actually maybe allowed you to find some answers as you were writing that you were kind of surprised with.
Yeah, I can try to combine both of those maybe, in fact.
Sure.
And you're right, like the actual process of writing the book, it forces you to kind of like take a stance on things, first of all. So there's a couple of buds in your brain. You kind of do have to allow them to blossom and do whatever you need to do that. And the two most surprising things, I think, for me, and those are the ones that I think like now, it's just about a year anniversary of the book's publication. So
Okay.
I've had lots of time to reflect on the kinds of things that were in there, see how they hold up, see how folks are responding to them. And I think the first one is like the nature of what, or like why we learn. So there's, I tried to not get too philosophical in the book because I wanted to be a practical guide for educators. But in the beginning, I do start to ask some questions about like, why do we teach what we teach our students? What does that mean for the world as it evolves? And how I can make sure that those things still hold value. And I think that's a question that like we've really enjoyed asking with educators, and really taking some time to sit back and think, the things that we all came into education for, the things that we want our students to be at the end of their educational journey. So things that our students themselves want to be at the end of their educational journeys hasn't really changed dramatically. And so there's fundamental things that, we want to make sure that our students are still able to communicate with other humans. They're able to navigate the world and understand what makes them happy and fulfilled. We want them to be able to support themselves. And we want them to be able to participate in democratic processes and make sure that they're doing it in ways that are conducive to their own needs, but also society's needs. And those things don't change, right? Like that's gonna be true no matter where AI technology is, how it dramatically revamps the job market. Those fundamental things will always remain important to us as educators and to our students as individual students. Like they cannot offload those things to somebody else. No one can, like the AI tool cannot be happy for them. The AI tool cannot make, vote for them. Maybe they can tell them who to vote for, but then fundamentally, hopefully we'll never give AI tools the right to vote. We'll see. Maybe I won't make too broad of a claim there that we will never do it, but I hope we never do that. And so, those things will remain important things for us to make sure that we're all equipped to do and navigate. And what does that mean for what the learning process looks like is means that we actually get to reduce the burden a little bit of, do we have to come up with everything? It does not have to be tied to your career path directly, right? You can learn for the sake of learning. You can learn for the sake of your own enjoyment. You can learn for the sake of being able to apply it in a non-career based context. And I think all of those things was you can't disconnect schooling from careers. We don't live in a system, we don't live in economic systems that allow that. But we can also start to think more broadly about how our learning shapes our careers later. And I think this is really where maybe the liberal arts background really starts to make it clear that, thinking about these things from a holistic lens can still provide you some specialization later in your career, but that initial holistic lens can make you a more well-rounded human. And your career doesn't have to be the end all be all of your education. So that, that's really, I'm hoping that we can start to find the joy in learning a bit more when we just realize that, even that joy can actually serve our career ends at some point. But also kind of give us the space to realize that education has more of a purpose than just, preparing you for one set career. Because the careers that you might be preparing your high school kids for, maybe even your college freshmen for, might not exist. We really don't know.
Exactly.
4 years from now, let alone 8 years from now, what careers are still going to be around. And so, we really want to make sure that we're helping them learn, how to enjoy learning. Those are the kinds of things that we hope that everybody gets a chance to tap into.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring a STEM metaphor here. It feels like it's a catalyst. So learning used to take it was this type of path. It used to take this time to do this type of task, and with this catalyst, it happens but faster. That a chemical reaction. That's in a very simple way. What a catalyst does is it accelerates a chemical reaction, and here it looks like if you use these tools, of course, in a way that is ethical, etc., it can allow us to level up faster in a certain way and spend less time in certain tasks that were very time consuming. But it doesn't mean that we somehow turn off our brains. I think it is an opportunity to then use that brain, that bandwidth of our mind to go further and to spend that energy and time on higher level things. I don't know if you agree with this, but it's the image that came as you were talking.
No, absolutely. And that this is where, this is true of all technological innovations in the past, right? It always frees up more of our capacity to do a higher level thing. The only reason we're even as humans building AI technology is because other technological innovations offloaded some other work we had to do, whether it be made it easier for us to commute somewhere, made it easier for us to share information, gave us medicine in order to live longer. All those, every tech advancement does free up some of our capacity to do higher level thinking, and we're hoping that, AI technology can do that too. There's a world in which, there is other contributions that we can do, and maybe not all of it has to be, put in terms of economic output. But there is still a role for us to play for other humans, and that's what we're hoping, that we free up more of the capacity to do that at higher and higher levels. And that was the second thing, was just I think there's a lot of fear about what does it mean for us, right, as humans, if these technologies get smarter than us or faster than us. And I think the first is that, hopefully we find ways to use it to augment ourselves. We find ways to, supplement our own individual goals, our societal goals. And then we find more capacity to do even cooler things, even more important things, make even bigger breakthroughs. And then the second is that I think also fundamentally always value other human creation, other human output. And so a great example right now with the Olympics going on is folks are sitting there watching folks run, and cars can go way faster, airplanes can go way faster, right? We have technology that can do these basic things faster and better. And yet we're all on TV glued watching other humans do it, because there's something remarkable about it when a human does it. And I think that
Yeah.
will, that will continue to be true. We'll feel differently about a human doing anything, helping us, doing a feat of some sort, because there's that shared humanness, and that we'll never have that shared humanness with an AI technology, because there is no shared humanness. And so,
Yeah.
so I think that hope like folks will always value contributions by other humans in some
Yeah.
way or another. So
Sure.
making sure that we're all contributing is still valuable and important.
Now, and coming like a segue from what you just said is this image. There's this image and this discourse that I've heard of, like, oh, people now when they travel, be it by car or even in walking the city, they're trusting I don't know, Google Maps or other things to guide them, and so people are losing, as a society, losing the ability to orient themselves in the city and I know, read maps, whatever. I think that's exaggerated, but I'm sure that there's some worry out there that something like this might happen with using AI. And where I'm going with this is I wonder, and I don't know, it's kind of a left field question. We didn't talk about it before the interview, but is there any way that in a couple of minutes you can popularize what's happening in a large language model? How is it that it does what it does? Because I think when I'm in the car and using, let's say, Google Maps or Waze, I know that there's triangulation with GPS. I can with GPS satellites, I can intellectually understand what's happening and trust the process. But I feel that there's been this like exponential burgeoning of AI offers out there, but I don't see, or at least I in my in my social media, etc. I have seen more offers coming out than explanations of what happens coming out. Is it possible to popularize it
I
a little
mean,
bit in, I don't know,
yeah,
5 minutes, as a kind of
I'll
a last stretch of the interview?
no, of course. Yeah, I'll try to give the highest level overview I can. And so the large language models are a particular type of generative AI, and the way they work is by taking a huge data set of text. And so whether that be everything published on the internet, books, kind of taking a large data set of text, and then mapping it onto a mathematical field. And so it figures out, okay, where are words likely to appear next to each other? It's kind of creating a vector of that. And so it might realize that the word I don't know, cow always shows up in sentences with the word moo, and so it maps those close to each other. Maybe farm's a little farther away. Maybe pig is there. Maybe dogs. Right? Like it starts to map out the probability of where words appear near each other in human-produced language. And then when it basically uses that to create some framework of understanding how human language. I'm oversimplifying this for the sake of time, but for how human language is formed. And then it's a predictive engine. And so when you put some text in to any of these AI tools, it says, okay, like if these words are the first 7 words in this question, using the probabilistic nature of like what it understands, or how it has mapped language, what are the next likely words to show up? And that's why it is probabilistic. So there's these, when you're playing with these tools, you can reduce how much randomness is introduced. There's lots of factors you can do, and some of these tools they all approach it a little bit differently. But then it says, okay, the next 10 likely words are this in this series based on that. Now, that's a very basic understanding of how that initially gets formed, but that's not all they do, right? If that's all they did, we might still not see the level of there'd be a lot more hallucinations. You'd get some more weird things, but you can see some hints of that. And so, for example, a really easy way to see that that's how it's fundamentally working is if the classic riddle about you have a bow and you have a wolf and a goat and you're trying to cross the river. I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about, but you're supposed to figure out how many times to go back and forth to make sure you get everybody across. I know,
Yeah. I've seen this problem.
But if you take that same one and you ask ChatGPT or like any AI tool, you say, oh, it's me and my dog, and you phrase it similarly and say, oh, now how do I cross the river? It immediately solves it the same way you would solve the other ones. So you cross the river once alone, then you come back and get your dog, and you go back, because it sees that that's how these types of words are followed by each other. And so that's where you start to see, okay, like this is where it really is just trying to figure out how language is formed and not really doing any thinking. It's not doing any sort of, it doesn't have any sort of knowledge base. But all that is also augmented now. And that's why we're seeing hallucination rates go down. That's why we're seeing more powerful engines. And there's two ways that's done. The first is they do training on it. And so when it produces outputs, they have humans rank that output. And so that's reinforcement learning. And so, they'll, lots and lots of things will be thrown at the algorithm. And when it produces outputs, humans look at this output is better than this output. And that's the reinforcement learning that kind of helps it like basically train the model as to what outputs are more preferred over other ones. So that's part of the process. And then what we're seeing a lot more show up now is also like what's called retrieval augmented generation. And that's where it can also search through actual text and then pull that and use that as part of the context. And so when it's, for example, like Google's Notebook is fundamentally that, because it searches what you have in the documents you've uploaded. It basically like says, okay, your question has these kind of keywords. Where do I find similar words in these documents? There's a very basic like find function, but again, it's smarter. So it's not as simple as like a control F find. So if you say, how do I, what are the assessments in my class, but your professor never used the word assessments, it will still find the word like test, because again, it's mapped onto the similarities between those words. It knows assessment and test are similar enough. And so if it finds things that mathematically like give them a similar, they look similar on the vector grid, it will still use that as part of the search query. And so that's where it's producing, then it finds that and then uses it to produce knowledge. Now, okay, I hope that was helpful to a degree, trying to explain at least like why these technologies are getting a little bit better is because they're able to do some of that retrieval now, and that causes less hallucination because it's able to back up basically what it's saying. But yeah, it's like a search engine plus like word auto predict combined together and substantially more powerful.
Makes total sense. And I don't think it's common knowledge that there's a human layer there in the process. And I'm sure it's really, really important. And thank you for mentioning it, because it's not something that I've heard about. But it makes sense. There needs to be some humans training the bot to say, okay, yeah, this output works according to my rules and to the probabilistic rules, but it's not good. And then it's funny because when I was finishing my master's in Lisbon, this was a long time ago, in the end of the 90s, there was something similar someone was working on, and it was really cutting edge at the time, and it was neural networks, and they were trying to use them to distinguish between this is really weird, but it was my domain at the time, microbiology. Through microbiological profiles, distinguish between cheeses of different cheese not factories, because they're really small, but in specific areas of Portugal, which is where I'm from. And it feels like it's the same thing, because the way they were doing it was first teaching the neural network, this cheese is from this factory. And eventually, because at the beginning it couldn't distinguish, and eventually after I don't know how much time and how many iterations of training, it was able to distinguish between things that were really similar but had a small difference, and it had learned it. And it feels like now, I don't know, 20 years later, that we're at, that's exactly what you're describing, but for something much larger scale than what I'm talking about.
Right, and those fundamental, like there are neural networks involved, there's machine learning involved, all those like same things those are what form the bedrock of being able to get to the technology the way it is right now. And they're starting to work on creating data, like AI generates the data set, and then AI also does the reinforcement itself, and so it decides whether the output is bad or not. And so we're going to start to see lots of like basically self-contained developments in the technology as well. So there's lots of cool behind the scenes tech
Mhm,
upgrades, the way that they're building the newest updates.
Excellent. Priten, we're reaching the end of the interview. One thing that I want to do first is ask you to share, because, of course, people who are watching, I've been sharing your website, uh, pedagogue.ai, and the link to your book, which is prtn.me/book. Again, the title is AI and the Future of Education. There's a subtitle, but people will find out about it there. But if people were still have questions after this conversation, we covered a lot of stuff, but this is a big issue. So I guess people still
Yeah.
can have fears, questions, things they'd like to reach out to you about. What's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, our Instagram is probably the best way. We're posting lots of things, everything, any event that I go to, any new thing that's published, all of that's posted there. But we also post lots of like updates about the most relevant things that are related to education
Mm.
on there, and that's at Pedagogy Cloud.
Mhm.
But also, if you search my name, my website comes up pretty easily, and there's a contact form there. So if anyone wants to just chat with me directly, feel free to just drop my name in Google, and it's usually one of the first. It's a unique enough name where you'll be able to find me,
Yeah.
and go ahead and send me an email, and I'm happy to jump on a call and talk.
Cool. And if I gave you a minute to describe what Pedagogy Cloud is about, what the mission is, because we've talked about some examples, we've talked about AI in its the different ways it can impact people in academia and in research. But yeah, how would you, what would you tell people who are listening what Pedagogy Cloud is about, what the mission is, and who the audience is for what you offer?
Yeah, so we're an education technology consulting company. And so we do everything from build these custom solutions, like I was talking about earlier, to do like strategy, policy making for institutions. A lot of our work right now is in the AI space. And so that's where pedagogue.ai is like the subset of pedagogy.cloud. And that's where the book is published through. We provide professional development for educators, and so at all levels. And so in-person workshops, online courses, webinars, all of that kind of happens there. We have lots of free resources, so things like syllabus template ideas, sample policies, all of that exists on the site. We also a breakdown of the U.S. State-by-state policies
Okay.
on AI and education are there. And then we also have we work on we're a tech company, and so we also build AI tools. And so one that we're really excited about right now is Socrat.ai. I'll send all of you these links so
Yeah,
that you
please do.
can put them in the chat. But that's basically a custom chatbot system where faculty can assign a chatbot to their students and then monitor the chat, see what interactions they're having. We have things like syllabus helper, where the student can kind of like upload their syllabus and then ask questions about it. Professor can upload some files and then have a chat with it. The students can chat about it. All kinds of cool little custom tools that like basically allow faculty and students to use the AI tools in productive ways. And so that's currently our big push this summer, is getting that cleaned up and ready for the fall semester. So lots of cool things we're dropping over there.
Very, very cool. And yeah, please do share all those links with me. I'll put them in the show notes of the episode, and then anyone listening, even on their podcast apps, they'll be able to go to the show notes and click and explore all that you have to offer. Priten, this has been really a pleasure. I've learned a lot. This question of AI, it's like a huge black box for a lot of us that are just users and not even power users, because I don't know if the way things are moving, it's tough to be a power user unless you're really dedicating a lot of time to one tool or a set of tools. I think you've shared a lot of value for the listeners, and I'm especially grateful for all the nuggets you shared in terms of examples that apply to education, to research, and to the potential, but also the care we need to have when using AI tools today. I think they're here to stay. It's clear. So it's really important to learn how to use them, to learn how not to use them, and then, of course, to follow the rules of, like you said, the policy of whichever institution you are in. It's exciting to see how you're trying to push the envelope in using it in very creative and useful ways for students, for teachers. And yeah, I'm super happy that we connected, and I'm really grateful that you had the time to come on the show today. I know you have, you're a recent new father, so I'm sure that's taking a lot of your time these days. So I'm really grateful you took the time to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.